Okay, thank you very much. Some very interesting talks there, I think, and it paints for me a picture of an incredibly complex landscape with a lot of change at the moment, complete absence of standard approaches. So I think this landscape will change a lot in the next few years and hopefully become simpler, because there are so many different levels of analysis that we could do, and yet we know that people are also drawn to simplicity. So I'll look forward to how we close that gap a bit over the coming years. So now we have the opportunity to ask our panel some questions. So if anybody has a burning issue. Yes.
Survey of various
Yes.
communities and whatnot. My impression is that what's most important to people will be what their research assessors are demanding be measured for them. That if they're trying to get a new job, if they're trying to get promoted, if they're trying to get a grant, it's what those folks say. Put these measures on your application, on your CV, on your whatever. That will be most important to those people. Do you disagree with that? The fact that all these people
That's definitely
say that they're
true.
interested in X, Y, and Z.
I mean, it is partly conditioning, yeah. If they're told this is how you're going to be assessed, that's what they're after. But in a lot of cases, they're not actually getting, the journal impact factor is not actually being used, and they just think it is, because it's ingrained. There's a lot of confusion there as well as to what actually is wanted, because oftentimes the institutions are aggregating that data and bringing it up to the higher level, so the individual researchers don't necessarily have a clear view over what's being assessed and how.
Yeah, I think you could imagine, Michael, maybe you have some input on this. You could imagine seeing the same result, even if you asked only people who are on evaluation committees, right? So, it comes from somewhere, right?
But no, it definitely, far and away, does matter. So, I mean, in Australia, the UK, Scopus became very important overnight, much more important than it used to be when it was chosen to be the data provider for citations, which is a good thing. Definitely like that type of awareness to change there. But other people have been successfully using altmetrics on their CVs in addition to that as supplemental information. And you start to see that bottom-up groundswell as well. I think it needs to come from both directions.
Great job, everyone. I really enjoyed that. But my question is, in this audience and as in general, I think you're speaking primarily on yourself as a publisher, and I think the awareness that needs to be raised is among the researcher community. Obviously, I mean, the survey showed that. What efforts what efforts are underway to educate them about everything we're talking about? Because it seems to me, this is my opinion, I don't know how accurate or not, maybe I'm overly sensitive to some of the publishing, that the publishers are kind of getting blamed for this, and I don't think it's our fault, for lack of a better term. We're not the ones who are, hitting people over the head with impact factors and things like that. So what efforts are you aware of to change that?
Well,
or am I completely fault-based?
Well, I mean, there was a big effort underway to try to change that perception, and that was the thing that was referred to by at least 3 of the 4, maybe all 4 of us, and that was the Declaration on Researcher Assessment. I do think so. That was mostly signed on by a lot of scientific societies saying, "Hey, we think it's being done wrong. We would like to change it." One thing that could happen more, and one of the things that Dora explicitly calls for, is for journalists to stop trumpeting their impact factors. You can't expect someone who has a very high impact factor to not talk about this advantage that they have. But I do think that, placing all of the emphasis, like I said, loading everything onto the citation is not the best thing. And so there could be more emphasis on looking outside the citation, coming from the publisher's side of things. That would be my message. Yeah. So if I was talking to, so I talk to researchers as well, because our product is very much direct to researcher, and we've done, a tremendous amount of evangelism around, altmetrics and broader impacts and things like that. So I don't think anyone is saying, this problem is only the problem of the publishers and they have to solve it, and, no one is saying that, like, publishers are the reason that metrics have come to be like they are. Obviously, in my opinion, the buck stops at the funders, really. And so people like the NSF have already started to call for things sort of altmetrics-ish in the broader impacts areas of the biosketches when you submit applications. So it's coming down from the funders. The desire is also coming up from researchers. Obviously, it benefits an early career researcher to look at things that are not citation-based just because they haven't been around long enough to get those citations. So there is a groundswell coming from researchers. But we still see a lot of publishers touting their impact factors, and that, I think, speaking to this crowd, is a recommendation that I would make.
I mean, one thing that I've been trying to do is trying to get Scopus citation counts next to the altmetrics as a way to raise the visibility of the altmetrics, because people are looking at their Scopus counts. So one thing we did with Ewan, the altmetric donut's been on Scopus since last June. So for Scopus users, at least, that's raising awareness quite a bit.
I think, so I can talk about the kinds of education that are actually happening with the researchers because I'm in the library. Like, my primary affiliation is in the library, and I'm affiliated with a major research effort on our campus. It's like a $50 million grant. We evaluate the outputs of that group using this kind of data. Now, the kinds of things that we never advocate on, when we are coming from the library, what metric, I would never say, oh, this particular thing is what you should use. We do, however, provide guidance to our administrators. We guide them away from these single numbers for assessing our faculty members. With our individual faculty, it's more of an education sort of approach. And I think that things that publishers or other similar types of organizations can do for, let's say, libraries who have that traditional role of providing education and support around some of these issues on campus is to provide clear information, materials that they can use to disseminate to their communities on campus, that kind of thing. Make it easy for us to talk about it on campus. Not easy to sell it, easy for us to talk about it on campus, because we come from a very, perspective where we are in a support role. But I think that, the libraries can be good partners in trying to help researchers understand how to best tell what's happening. So, you mentioned NSF asking for this kind of information. So is the NIH. The NIH is asking for people to report impact in their competitive renewals. And when that started to happen, I can tell you people freaked out. Like, what does this mean? Well, how do you define impact? Well, I do a lot of qualitative work. How do I tell that story? Or I do a lot of, I'm a chemist. I don't know what my impact is. I'm just doing science because it's interesting, that kind of a thing. So we've had actually a lot of energy and interest on campus as we help people to be able to use the great data that you guys have and are sitting on and can make openly available. I'm a huge advocate for open information. If you can make that available, then we can leverage it and help people tell what's happening. But if we can't get into it, or reuse it, we're asking, even basic bibliographic metadata is actually incredibly important because you can use it for a variety of other purposes. Which you can get available through, the Scopus API if you're a Scopus subscribing institution. So. Yeah.
And the Mendeley API, if you're anybody who has a computer and internet connection, you get a lot of metadata from the Mendeley API as well. And there's things like Crossref and now FundRef, which I think is a really, really useful service for these kind of assessments. And ORCID, critical, obviously, for doing some of these comparisons.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Now I'm going to sound as if I'm anti-numbers, and I'm not actually at all, because I really love numbers, and I'm a bit of a geek and really like to see all of these graphs and everything. But sitting here listening to you all, and thinking about this business of data, things always having to be ranked and scored, I'm sitting here thinking about, I'm sure many of you know that in the UK student fees have gone right up. And one of the things that the government has done in response to this is that all higher education institutions, AGIs, have got to provide a set of data to prospective students to tell them certain things, which is meant to help them choose. So it's a set of scores, like how many student contact hours, how many teaching contact hours does each institution have? Now, you might think, well, that's okay, that's fine. But some recent research has just been done, and that shows that actually number of contact hours does not correlate with student success. What actually correlates with student success is class size. So it's great to have numbers, but just because you've got a high score doesn't necessarily mean you've got anything useful. I just wanted to throw that in the mix.
That's such a great comment. And how do we become focused on outcomes, not outputs? And
Exactly.
I know our panel want to address that.
Would you like to start, Christy? I feel like I'm a loudmouth.
No. I mean, I think that's it's a brilliant comment because, you know, I always feel like I'm in this position where I'm kind of being the negative Nancy about some of these, altmetrics or, like youth statistics because, I'm not. Like I'm, as you mentioned, I am also kind of geeky about this. I love it. I think it's very cool how you can see how this stuff is happening. But I just want people to understand, like, there's no standardization. There's no provenance right now. It's hard to be able to get some standardization here and to be able to understand what these numbers mean. And even if you can understand what the numbers mean, I think that it's critically important to remember what it is you're doing this for. So it's easy for me to tell the story in biomedical, in the biomedical research realm because what's our goal? It's improved human health. So that's how we tell those stories is how does this lead toward improved human health, not it got, it was downloaded 3 times and tweeted 500 times and, whatever. That can be indicative of something cool happening, but, so I feel a lot of conflict in this area, but not really. I think there's a lot of interesting work that can be done, and I think looking at, making these things available, using some standards that have really been, of course, I work on the Vivo project, so we're very interested in structuring information according to a common ontology. It's, it's been voted on by 60 of the largest biomedical research institutions in the country, Stanford, Northwestern, WashU, Harvard, making this data available about their researchers as linked open data, as RDF. And so this is a really interesting place. Like, you should know that this is happening. This is happening by these huge institutions. It's good to get on board with open data and figuring out how you can leverage that, for the improved benefit of all.
So I just wanted to see if I could get your question clear. What you're saying is that you think that we should really be careful to use the right number for the right application.
Yes, and also
So
how do you measure it? As I say, you can think that something like number of contact hours sounds like it has face validity, doesn't it? Ooh, contact hours must be good for student outcomes. But actually, somebody did some research, Graham Gibbs, and he says, no, actually, what gives good student outcomes is class sizes, but they're not in the key information sets that AGIs are having to produce for students to make choices. So, as I say, I've got nothing against numbers, but you have to be a bit careful with numbers.
So your concern is really it's more that it's premature
Possibly.
in some cases.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with having all these numbers, and I would like to have them. But
What do they mean?
exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
it.
would anyone take the other side of that argument and say, no, I have a number and I'm going to use it whether or not I know what it means? Anybody want to take the other side of that?
Take that side. Yeah, the collection of numbers is very that number and the other number, one number stays constant across several articles, several journals, the other number changes.
So now you're looking at a trend and not a single number, a velocity, as Andre, I think, put earlier, right?
Exactly. Which is a good reason to not have one simple number. It's probably better to have.
And it's a good reason to have something that aggregates on a much finer temporal resolution than something like citations
Yeah,
would.
from different sources as well.
Yep.
Well, and this is a volatile area, so things are going to change in response to perturbations in the system by things like funding agencies. So if a funding agency asks for things to be different or decides to shift a lot of their emphasis and dollars toward a particular area, well, all of a sudden that's a hot area. Is it a hot area because science moved organically toward that direction, or because there's been that push? You know, so I mean, I think looking at trends rather than like concrete numbers, I think can be incredibly enlightening and keeping everything in context.
Any other questions? No? Glass of wine beckons, I think.
Yes.
So thank you very much for your attention and questions, and thank you also to our panel.
Thank you.
for,